There are people who think in general that you get fluent by speaking, and this is actually not true. You get fluent by first getting the language in you, and then you refine your language skills by speaking. I will go back to Japanese with a vengeance. If you take notes, it will make you pay much more attention, and attention is the first step towards retention. Absolutely right on the money. I really like the fact he's talking about declarative versus procedural memory. A few days ago, I came across a super duper cool video by Spencer, a fellow language learner who tells the story of how he went from being lost and frustrated using all the usual methods that do not work to finally figuring out how to learn a language in a way that actually makes sense. I was doing Duolingo every day and still couldn't speak. I've been in the language learning world for over 3 decades. I've learned 14 languages, worked as a language coach, a content creator, and now I run my own smart language learning academy. And yet, every now and then, I see a video that reminds me why so many adult learners are still stuck. It's not because they're lazy or untalented, but because they do not know what works. This video lays it out beautifully, and I wanted to react to it, not just to highlight what Spencer got so right, but also to share my own perspective as someone who's been deep in this space for years. I'll break down what works, why it works, and how you can use these insights to upgrade your language learning strategy today. Whether you're a total beginner or trying to get from B2 to C1, this one is for you. Let's dive right in.
What if everything you've been taught about learning a language is completely backwards? Today, I can use Chinese to navigate complex business discussions. And I did it using a method so counterintuitive that experts might even call it lazy.
First of all, he said, what if you're learning languages backwards? Unfortunately, most people are learning languages backwards across the globe.
Be that person with color-coded notebooks, subscription applications, and weekend study intensives. I would block out 2 to 3 hours for rigorous daily study sessions, determined to master Mandarin through sheer discipline and willpower. But 6 months in, despite my dedication, I could barely string basic sentences together. The pronunciation felt unnatural. The vocabulary wouldn't stick. And worst of all, maybe, I started translating everything in my head before I actually started speaking. And this
kind of reminds me of the first time I talked to Saiko, my Japanese instructor. I've been learning Japanese for 1.5 years or something like that, and I've been making all the possible mistakes a man can make when it comes to learning Japanese or foreign languages for that matter. And I remember that every conversation was a tragedy. It took me like 30 seconds to come up with a sentence. And the reason why, in retrospect, is because I had approached language learning wrong. I think this guy is right on the money when it comes to the fact that we learn backwards and we are actually wired to learn foreign languages. We just need to find a way to absorb them naturally. In retrospect, and mind you, I will go back to Japanese. I will go back to Japanese with a vengeance because now I know how to approach it. If I had done the right things, things would have been quite different. We lack sometimes patience. We want to speak as fast as possible, but the reality is language learning takes time, and we are way better off absorbing the language in a natural way, like this person is about to explain, and then the magic happens.
This, of course, would create that awkward delay that would make conversations painful to have and probably painful to listen to. Now,
yeah, that's exactly my case for Japanese. Painful to have and painful to listen to, because I used to listen to the recordings later and I told myself, oh my God.
As chief operating officer of a growing e-commerce company, I am obsessed with efficiency. And
I am obsessed with efficiency as well, but I don't have the same job as this guy.
So one day it hit me. What if my approach to learning languages was fundamentally inefficient? I mean, what if all of this structured studying was actually the problem and not the solution?
I like the way he asked this question. But although, to be fair, I don't think that structured study is bad in and of itself. I think it might be good, it could be good, but it really depends how you spend your time in general, what activities you engage in.
This question sent me down a neurolinguistic rabbit hole that I became obsessed with, and it ended up totally changing the way I approached studying languages.
Sounds exciting. Let's see what this guy has to say.
To share something with you that might sound ridiculous at first, but I promise you it's backed by cutting-edge brain linguistic science that has helped thousands of learners who might be stuck just like you finally have a breakthrough. I call it the neurological alignment method, although...
Wow, this sounds pretty cool. I wish I could have come up with something like that.
A lot of my friends just call it the lazy way of mastering languages. It's designed to work in harmony with your brain's natural processes, rather than just fighting against them. Now, before I explain the core techniques, you need to first understand why the traditional methods simply don't work. Our brains actually aren't designed to learn languages by memorizing grammar rules or studying vocabulary lists. Think for a second about how you learned your native tongue. Did anyone drill you on conjugation tables as a toddler? Of course not. You absorbed language naturally through meaningful contexts that had some relevance to you and your life. Now, neuroscience reveals that languages are stored in your memory in the procedural.
I really like this. I really like the fact that he's talking about procedural memory, something that not a lot of people talk about. Let's see what he has to say, and then we're going to delve into it.
Part of the brain. And it turns out that this is the same neurological system that helps us with riding a bike or with typing on a keyboard. Now, traditional studying methods when it comes to learning a language targets what's called declarative memory. Now, it's really great for memorizing facts or figures or something like that, but it's absolutely terrible when it comes to helping you develop an automatic skill. So, what's the alternative? Something
Absolutely right on the money. I really like the fact he's talking about declarative versus procedural memory. When we learn our own native language, we primarily learn it through procedural memory. Basically, our processes go to what is called the basic ganglia, and that's the reason why it's so automatic to speak your own native language or a language you know well. When you reach a very high level, fluency, then everything becomes automatic. One word leads to the other. This is because the brain doesn't make much effort because, again, there's another part. It's not the prefrontal cortex, but rather the basal ganglia that manage the process. And the problem with language learning instruction and education is that it's based upon the premise that we learn through memorization, we learn by picking up words, by learning by memorizing these words, by learning, trying to figure out grammar rules and applying them. It does not work this way. Primarily, language learning is a skill that you develop, and I would say that it's 80 to 95% a skill that is stored in the procedural memory. It's implicit, it's subconscious, and 10% is actually conscious, and it's managed by the declarative memory. I believe, though, that you have to learn how to combine the two, because declarative memory also has a role, an important role in language learning, but the problem is you have to really flip the table, so to speak. Can you say flip the table? I'm not sure. Anyway, you get the point. You have to change your perspective so that you basically, base your language learning strategies on procedural memory, on learning it as a skill, on learning it organically. You don't learn just words or grammar rules, and then you do exercises, and then you do grammar drills or pronunciation drills, and then you try to put everything together. It does not work that way. You have to learn it holistically. Learn and approach it holistically. So this guy is right on the money.
Something so enjoyable, you're going to question whether or not it's actually effective. Something you're probably already doing every single day without truly realizing its potential. Television.
Ta-da! This kind of reminds me, before he continues, about the fact that I basically massively improved French by watching television. I still remember at the ripe age of 14 or 15, I don't remember exactly, I started watching France 2. So I realized that from Italy, my own native country, I could watch French television. I could watch it with subtitles. So I remember that I started watching television and I stumbled upon this French cult movie, which is called La Boum. And I fell in love with this beautiful French actress, Sophie Marceau. And once I fell in love with Sophie Marceau, then I also fell in love with French. I started watching shows every single night and taking notes because I could actually see the subtitles. I could see the words and not just listen to them. So television can be very, very efficient because you're doing something that is fun and you're learning a bunch out of it and from it.
Yes, really. But not just any
Another nice title.
passive watching whatever the heck happens to be on the television. This is a strategic visual approach to taking regular entertainment and transforming it into the most powerful of language acquisition tools. Now, I'm just going to say it, this isn't about zoning out to foreign films with your native tongue subtitles on the TV. It's about creating a deliberate experience that mimics how your brain naturally acquires a language. So in that sense, I guess you could call it strategic entertainment immersion.
Love it.
The magic happens because visual storytelling provides rich contextual cues that help your brain naturally map meaning to new sounds and patterns. Your neurological language centers activate automatically when meaning is clear, even without understanding every single word. I transformed my Mandarin speaking and listening ability just by watching a couple of hours of TV every single day, which, by the way, I already did before. It just wasn't in Mandarin. And again, this wasn't a replacement for studying. This was studying.
Come to think of it, think about all the TV shows and the documentaries and the movies you watch in your own native language. And then when you start watching it in a foreign language, then it becomes a rewarding experience. And also you learn a bunch from it. I remember that back in school, going back to when I was learning French, and the same thing happened in English in parallel. My schoolmates started asking, how does he speak English so well, so suddenly, and or French for that matter? And the reason is that I had started watching a lot of movies, and movies contain the kind of language that you really need in order to speak naturally with other native speakers, because this is how actually the language is being used. And also you understand you get exposed to the gesture, to pragmatics, how people use the language in certain situations, how they react to certain circumstances. So it's absolutely amazing. Of course, in order to watch television and enjoy it, you have to do a bunch of things before, and you have to get to a point where you can enjoy the show without stopping every time and looking up words. But that's a different matter.
This was my primary study method, and the results were astonishing. The content selection is critical and has to follow the comprehension 80-20 rule. Start with content that you understand about 80% of, either through the visuals on the screen, the context that's provided to you, or something to do with the motions maybe that the person is using on screen. This creates the perfect zone where your brain is able to infer meaning without getting frustrated.
What he's talking about is basically the Goldilocks zone, or the zone of proximal development. This is a very important concept in cognitive development or cognitive theory, and also in linguistics. It basically means that you have to find yourself in the optimal zone where something is not too easy, otherwise you don't learn much out of it and you get bored, and something is not too complicated, otherwise you get very discouraged. Think about things you have probably stumbled upon, like reading a book when you're still not ready to read a book, and then you read a page or a couple of pages, you struggle through and you tell yourself, what the heck, this is too difficult. Or talking about movies, you watch a movie and you basically understand very little because you're not ready for it. So you have to get to a point where you can enjoy the movies, and you have to do it by using scaffolding, or I don't know. I never get this one right, but you get the idea. Scaffolding is basically using the knowledge you have in order to take a step further and understand more and more
about not understanding the peripheral things. For example, begin especially with content designed for either beginners or for children. Mini stories with repetitive structures, simplified news programs for language learners, or children's shows with very visual storytelling. Then after that, you can
That's an excellent point. I always use Assimil or Teach Yourself, which is a book that you can use. It has, bilingual dialogues, and then it also has some grammar notes that explain the obscure points, or the points that you will not understand just by comparing the version in the two languages, the dialogue in the two languages, your target language and your native language. But the reality is that nowadays you have a deluge of a wealth of resources, visual resources that you can use. You can go to YouTube, and let's say that you're learning Spanish, and you can watch, for example, YouTube videos for Spanish beginners, where the person speaks very slowly and explains everything on screen. So you can see what he's pointing at, you can see the actions he's doing, and you can learn from it. Plus you have subtitles in the two languages. So you have everything you need in order to start learning a language from scratch just by using visual stuff. I prefer using Assimil and Teach Yourself, but again, to each his own. But the point is, you have to start from the beginning. If you start from scratch, you have to build that knowledge until you get to the point where you can enjoy a TV show or a documentary or a movie. So he's explaining exactly what I was talking about before. In order to enjoy movies, you have to first put in the work.
And gradually progress to the following: teen dramas with straightforward plots, documentary series on already familiar topics, or competition shows where actions are clearly tied to dialogue. For example,
I think the main point is to find stuff you like. Teen dramas, that's fine. You can also use graded readers, and you can listen to them. It's not necessarily visual stuff, but the point is, find things that are progressively more difficult, but not as difficult as normal movies, and stuff that you enjoy. And another important point is my suggestion is maybe to watch things that you're familiar with. You've watched it in your own native language, and then you know the story, you're familiar with it, so it's way easier to understand the concept and the content.
For me, with Mandarin, I started with very basic content aimed at beginners. And eventually, I was able to graduate to more complex content that actually aligned with my personal interests. Now,
Yeah,
there are
that's exactly the point I was making before.
two ways to implement this technique: active immersion and passive immersion. Active viewing, as you can probably guess, means giving your complete undivided attention to the content. I'm talking about no phone scrolling, no multitasking, no distractions from other devices or notifications, full mental engagement on what you're studying. Now, passive immersion is also very valuable, but solves a different neurological purpose. This is where you allow content to play in the background while you're working out or cooking or commuting or doing any other activity. This allows your brain to continue to process the patterns of the language, although subconsciously. And just a quick
This is wonderful. Two main points here I wanted to address. The first one is about active engagement. My suggestion, this is what has been working for me. It works wonders, but again, it depends on whether you have the drive to do it, is to just watch something and take notes. If you take notes, it will make you pay much more attention, and attention is the first step towards retention. This is not just to learn new words, but also really to pay attention, to engage with the process. Just the fact that you're using your hand, paper, you have something here concrete and not digital is great. So the combination of watching something and at the same time taking notes, maybe you can easily stop with your left hand and write with your right hand, if you're right-handed, of course, otherwise you do the opposite, really makes you lock in the content. And this is really important because most people just watch things thinking, oh, I just, immerse myself in the stuff and I'm just going to learn as a consequence of that. Unfortunately, it does not work that way. So that's the first point. You have to spend some time doing things deliberately and proactively engaging with the content, because the level of attention doubles, triples, and then the level of retention doubles and triples as a consequence of that. And the second very important point is that then you also need to listen to something in the background, because if you listen to something in the background and possibly something you've gone through before in an active way, then your brain learns even better. It's a combination of these two things. This is what I've been doing, for example, very successfully with Greek, and I talk about it in the Overcoming the Intermediate Plateau course. It's a technique called listen to review, and students love it, that solves the problem of actually having to review words. Because if, say, in a week you do 2 podcasts, let's say you go through 2 podcasts or 2 videos for that matter, and then you dissect them, you take notes, etc. Then the following week, if you listen to them in the background, either it's a video that you play on YouTube, if you have YouTube Premium, you can play it in the background, or you just listen to it, and what happens is that your brain picks up these words automatically. Oh, I listened to these words again. And your skills get better and better. So this is actually amazing, because it's a combination of engagement, a couple of times a week, and then it's all passive stuff that you listen to in the background, and these two things work in conjunction. So this guy is right on the money.
Just a quick note. Sorry, it doesn't work while you're sleeping. Anyway, the real breakthrough came for me when I combined these two approaches. I would actively watch new content and then replay it several times while doing other things. This repeated exposure cemented the patterns of the language in my brain without needing to add extra time to studying. Now, here's where
That's exactly what I was saying before. I've been doing this for Greek. I've been doing it for other languages. My students have been doing it in their own target languages. It works like a charm.
Approach becomes truly controversial. I recommend minimal speaking. That means minimal output practice until you've accumulated about 300 or so hours of quality input time. Now, I know this flies in the face of conventional wisdom that says you need to start speaking from day one. Your brain needs to build strong recognition.
So he says flies in the face of common sense. Actually, for those who know, CI, the comprehensive input hypothesis, is pretty clear that you have to put in a lot of language in you to get massive input, exposure to the language before you speak. But again, there are people who think in general that you get fluent by speaking, and this is actually not true. You get fluent by first getting the language in you, and then you refine your language skills by speaking. And I also like here the fact that he's showing Broca and Wernicke, or Broca because he was French. It's a really important part of language learning. Broca is the area that manages speaking production, while Wernicke is understanding. So if you have the so-called Broca's aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia, a lot of interesting things happen. For example, you can speak without making sense, or you have a hard time speaking if one of or both areas are impacted for medical reasons. Anyway, I like the fact that he's
before production becomes natural. And when you finally actually start speaking, you'll find that the words flow from your mouth a lot better than you expected because these patterns have been cemented in your neurological pathways. And
absolutely correct. I don't know if it ever happened to you that you've been doing a lot of input and all of a sudden you just, words come to the fore and that you were not aware of. Oh, how do I know this word? And why did it come to the fore right now? This has been happening, for example, to an an English student of mine who has been learning Italian. He was using all the backwards strategies before we started working together. And then once we started working together, it's a very heavy input-based approach. Then things started, warming up for him, and how more words and expressions come to his mind, and his way of learning Italian and speaking Italian and listening to Italian, etc., has completely changed.
And yes, while outputting the first time, it might feel a little slow and clunky. Very rapidly, you're going to realize that there's no awkward translation, no struggling to recall grammar rules, just fluid communication.
That's absolutely true, because once again, it's implicit, subconscious, and once it's a subconscious process, then activating it is way easier than just like trying to pick up words and grammar rules and then trying to put them together. So it's a matter of being patient. It's a matter of exposing yourself to the language in a deliberate way, in a proactive way, in a passive way, and then the magic is going to happen.
After a few hundred hours of inputting Mandarin into my brain, I was shocked to find that my conversations were actually surprisingly smooth. The right phrases would kind of emerge naturally, and I actually had pretty decent pronunciation and tone for a non-native speaker. But
yes, because among other things, you do not just learn vocab patterns or grammar patterns. You also learn sound patterns if you learn and approach a language holistically.
Please don't get me wrong. I was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I was significantly more comfortable and capable than I expected to be. When I look back at my language acquisition journey, I think the biggest breakthrough came when I stopped trying to force a language into my brain and instead allowing it to just enter naturally, and honestly, the results speak for themselves.
I love it. You just don't have to force anything when it comes to language learning. The problem is when you try to force things and then you get frustrated because things do not turn out to be the way you wanted them to be. Language learning is something you get familiar with. It's not something you learn. I know that this sounds counterintuitive because we're used to, navigating and functioning within a system, an educational system or an education system where we have to learn things and then you have to produce things. But language learning is about exposing yourself to the language, getting familiar with it, becoming part of you, and then you use it for your own life.
Literally. So there you have it. By working with your neurological wiring, you find out that things become remarkably easy and enjoyable instead of having to struggle and struggle and struggle. Now, you're going to be surprised to hear that what I love most about this method isn't just that it works. It's that it transforms language learning from this annoying homework that's nagging you to do it to something that you really enjoy and look forward to at maybe the end of your day. In this video, I have called strategic entertainment immersion isn't cutting corners. It's actually the most direct path to fluency in your target language. And hey,
100% correct. When language learning becomes its own reward, that's when things really start taking off. People ask me why I've been learning 14 languages. Why will I continue learning languages for the rest of my life? The answer is yes, because it's a reward in and of itself. Every time I sit down and I learn a language, it's pure joy. Honestly, bravo, Spencer. This is the kind of video I wish more learners would watch. It's research-backed, practical, and gripping. It reflects my own journey moving from language rookie to speaking 14 foreign languages with confidence. And more importantly, it also shows what is not for you. It is the outdated, inefficient, brain-unfriendly methods that make your attempts at learning any foreign language derail. But if I have to share with myself one tip that changed everything for me, it's this. Language learning is not something you study. It's not something you memorize or force into you. It's something you slowly get familiar with by doing stuff you like. And that alone has profound implications on how you go about it. I think this is the power of this video. I left a link to the original video in the description box, and please check Spencer's channel. There's a lot of good stuff waiting for you. And if you resonated with this video and with my 2 cents about it, you're going to love something I created just for you. It's my language accelerator guide, a clear, no-fluff roadmap to help you learn faster, smarter, and with way less frustration than whatever you're doing right now. You'll find the link, once again, in the description box or pinned comment below. Don't miss it. That is it for today, folks. As always, happy language learning, and see you in the next video.